This will always be the hottest debate in Jujutsu Kaisen history. Can Satoru Gojo beat Heian Era Sukuna? Who is actually stronger between the two? The answer you've been waiting for will shock you. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Of course, in canon, Gojo himself said in chapter 236 that he didn't stand a chance. He even believed that he would have lost against Sukuna without using Mahoraga. Obviously, this starts ringing alarm bells, as we recently just did a video explaining every step Sukuna took since chapter 1 to get Mahoraga to bypass Gojo's Limitless to win. Therefore, logically, without Mahoraga, Sukuna would not have won, right? This thought process leads us to believe Gege has written something contradictory. However, let's make sense of everything, cause Gege was cooking and Gojo wasn't telling a lie. The second thing to address regarding this fight is the different attitudes coming into it. This was literally told to us by Kusakabe in chapter 234, that Sukuna is holding back a killer move because his win conditions are different. He has to fight every single sorcerer after Gojo, so he cannot reveal all his power. On the other hand, Gojo's only win condition is to kill Sukuna, whilst the others would deal with Kinjaku. Sukuna even mentioned to Kashimo in chapter 238 that the whole reason for fighting is to taste every unique opponent that challenges him, and it's the perfect way to pass time until death. This explains why Sukuna took so many gambles fighting Gojo, because the whole time he wanted to upgrade his technique to bypass Limitless and see what he could do. Jujutsu Kaisen has established many different power scaling elements, such as binding vows, incantations, martial arts, domains, and innate techniques. One other aspect that a lot of people seem to forget is gambling, the consequences of choices that one would take to achieve their strategy. This means that fights between equally graded sorcerers can go either way, with both of them having different odds to win, much like roulette. That's why this very idea was personified with Mei Mei giving gambling odds to the whole world whilst watching Gojo vs Sukuna in chapter 222. So given this fact, the community, including myself, can create an infinite amount of scenarios that would appease either Gojo's odds of winning or Sukuna's. However, this brings us to a question regarding Gojo's Limitless. Fans believe that Mahoraga was the only way for Sukuna to bypass it, but this is simply not true. Sukuna's domain amplification and domain expansion also bypass Limitless and give him an equal opportunity to get his kill. This means if Gojo faces Heian Era Sukuna, who wouldn't have Mahoraga, it doesn't matter, as he still has two options, thus reinforcing Sukuna's primary objective to evolve his dismantle. The difference in mindset between the strongest is highlighted at the very start of their battle, when Sukuna states Gojo's ego is too big. How could he be the challenger if Gojo is claiming catching him off guard is impressive? He then calls him a fish on a cutting board. He may flop around but is still nameless. So first, he will strip Gojo's scales away. Now at this point, I can address if Gojo was holding back in his fight against Sukuna, because he wanted to save Megami, right? But as I stated earlier, the opposite is true. It was actually Sukuna who couldn't use full power. He even admits in chapter 230 that he isn't fighting as hard as Gojo. And then we learn later on, he could have used a one-time RCT to go back to his full form. This is even clarified in chapter 224, when Gojo said he won't hold back as Megami's face reminds him of Toji. And then he tells Sukuna that dying in Yuji's body was a grave mistake, as he was brought back from the dead. So with all of that out of the way, let me begin breaking down each fighting category between the two, starting with hand-to-hand combat. It's easy to assume Gojo clearly is superior, and that's because the manga provides power scaling for us to understand the sheer amount of strength he possesses. For example, Gojo's punches are already laced with his blue technique. This means at the moment of impact, he uses blue to boost infused his fists with curse energy, but then Sukuna would receive a counter punch on top of it. This is similar to Yuji's divergent fist. To go even further, Jogo claims that Gojo's punches alone could kill the disaster curses, even though they scale to 8 to 9 Sukuna fingers, whereas the likes of Yuta and Hakairi, whom are special grade sorcerers, said they were incapacitated and vomited only after tanking one of Gojo's punches. However, adding Black Flash on top of that makes it a whole different ball game. Yuji recalls Nanami telling him not to bother to compare himself to Gojo in chapter 231 because every single punch is a critical hit, whilst Nanami's compared to Gojo's are normal jabs. It can even be scaled mathematically. For example, in chapter 48, we are told that Black Flash multiplies the destructive power of a strike by a normal hit to a power of 2.5. This means it's an exponential growth in power. The stronger the regular hit, the higher the multiplier. For example, if a regular hit does 10 damage, a Black Flash will do 316 damage. A hit of 100 damage means a Black Flash does 100,000 instead. This highlights the inconceivable force Gojo's Black Flash has, making it the most powerful punch ever performed in the manga. As a result, in chapter 233, this Black Flash worked and hurt Sukuna, so he wakes up to unleash Rabbit Escape. But no, I'm a Gojo fan, but we can't keep glazing Gojo now, can we? Because this also proves that Sukuna has the highest recorded defense, as he was only knocked out for a second. I mean, the fact that chapter 223 states Sukuna reacted to a 200% purple and sensed its immense power only in the last moment, yet still survived, means he's more durable than anyone in the whole verse. Looking back holistically, we can clearly see Gojo dominating taijutsu battles very convincingly on multiple occasions. But why is that? One of the reasons later on in the fight was that Sukuna wanted to tank damage but minimally on purpose so that Mahoraga's wheel would spin and adapt. He needed the model for his space-cutting dismantle to develop. He was also turning off his domain amplification just for this adaptation to work, which gave him a disadvantage in taijutsu in the first place. So overall, we can say Gojo was performing better than him entirely. Sukuna, in fact, even compliments Gojo on his taijutsu hand-to-hand combat in chapter 226. He moves well for someone using RCT at full throttle. However, would this be the same case against Heian Era Sukuna? Well, Kashimo got toyed with as a ragdoll and got no diff thanks to 4 arms and 2 mouths. This is even though he was fast enough to dodge a dismantle that killed Gojo, and his curse technique could literally disintegrate anything. Sukuna flexed against his punches and would use his other pairs of arms to destroy him. He could essentially defend and attack at the same time, but Gojo did prove he can handle multiple opponents in his 3 vs 1. Even though Agito, Mahoraga, and Sukuna were all attacking at once, Gojo was still able to deal with them, and he did take down 2 out of 3. That tells me that in regards to hand-to-hand, Gojo's martial arts does prove to be substantial even against Sukuna's Heian Era form. Sukuna would be forced to use amplification, unlike against Kashimo, to bypass Limitless. Man, saying all of that causes a dilemma, because if Sukuna was in his Heian Era form, it would mean the time of 3 minutes 9 seconds that Gojo had to beat Sukuna down in the domain clashes would be much longer, and since every second counts, it's a big difference. Even a 0.01 second gap made Gojo receive an opportunity to win one of the 5 clashes, finally landing a limited void. But this isn't even counting the fact that Sukuna's Heian Era form is built different to tank even more damage. Even the most powerful attack Gojo has, which is 200% hollow purple, it would do a lot less damage. Therefore, the win condition for Sukuna to defeat Gojo is even easier in his Heian Era form, as his cursed tools will be helping him out, and Gojo would find a harder time to destroy his domain within that time span. However, before I get ahead of myself going into the domain clashes, we must cover reverse curse technique and their efficiency in curse energy for everything to make sense, as their strength and speed are relative to each other, so there is no need to cover that in detail until I do their separate videos. Gojo's reverse curse technique compared to Sukuna may look like it is equal. The king's knowledge to apply it to others and cure death does give him an advantage. However, unlike Sukuna, we know Gojo can use reverse curse technique to heal his brain at all times. It saved him from death against Toji, and it was on at full throttle against Malevolent Shrine, a domain that would instantly kill any other sorcerer. Even Kashimo died after Sukuna threw only a couple at him without even using domain, which increases the output. Therefore, in comparison to Gojo's feats, who tanked hundreds if not thousands of slashes throughout the fight, thanks to his amazing use of RCT, he is pretty busted. One of those accomplishments were believed to be impossible. He cured his burnout, which Sukuna copied after only seeing it once, meaning he's just as talented as Gojo. Gojo was destroying and then healing his brain multiple times, reviewed in chapter 230. Sukuna never had to use it before against any other opponent, as all the sorcerers he's ever faced in his life and in the Heian era died way too quickly for him to even reach this point, showcasing his immense strength. This is only a testament to Gojo's skill to finally push Sukuna to a limit to feel nervous for the first time in 1,000 years, thus earning the reward to be acknowledged by the king. Even their speed of its usage is matched. A simple example would be Sukuna tanking 200% hollow purple, but had recovered one of his arms instantly when Gojo teleported 4 kilometers, and vice versa. Gojo recovered from slashes to his face and on the neck just as quickly in chapter 226. So in terms of reverse curse technique, they seem to be equal. Gojo can use it much more than Sukuna, as it's on at all times due to the 6 eyes providing almost unlimited curse energy. This is only if he doesn't overexert himself. It was thanks to that he could constantly fight in the domain clashes. Plus, he replenished it by the end thanks to Black Flash, as his output was actually dwindling. Sukuna as well had RCT slowing down, as mentioned by Kusakabe. So as we know, 6 eyes is something Sukuna doesn't have. However, his application of reverse curse technique is much more vast. He can do things that Gojo can't do, and had a one-time usage of bringing back his full form anyway. So it's up to you what benefit you value more, as this now brings me to curse energy efficiency. Technically, both are equal, but the thing to note here is that Sukuna's usage is equal to Gojo despite not even having the 6 eyes. Yuta states that he has more reserves of curse energy than Gojo, but because of his 6 eyes, Gojo's curse energy is replenished almost immediately after consumption. So without the 6 eyes, Gojo has comparatively much less curse energy than Yuta does. But in comparison to Sukuna, it's not even close. Yuta, who is stated to have a bottomless pool of curse energy, claims Sukuna has double than him. So essentially, the only reason Gojo could match Sukuna was because he was blessed with 6 eyes. If he didn't have them, he would be outmatched. But we cannot downplay Gojo's talent, as both these beasts make use of their powers at their maximum potential because of it. Why else would a 6 eyes limitless user lose against a untamed Mahoraga 400 years ago? That's because they were not Gojo. Gojo is clearly the most refined and strongest 6 eyes user in history, thanks to his hard work and talent. And using this logic, it should also be applied to Sukuna. Yes, he was using 10 shadows, but how is that cheating if it's his talent that made all the Shikigami seem overpowered in the first place? Megami can't achieve half the feats Sukuna performed even if he had the time to do it. And to put this debate to rest, Gojo complimented Sukuna regarding this in chapter 233, where he stated, "What's with casually deploying a Shikigami's power without manifesting itself? Moves like piercing blood, making use of max elephant, requires skill on my level." But what about their curse techniques? Gojo claimed his limitless is overwhelmingly stronger in chapter 226, and he isn't wrong. But as Kenjaku mentioned, there is a flaw in every single technique. Sukuna was waiting for the model from Mahoraga to discover it, and if he didn't, he would have resorted to other means, such as double downing on his use of amplification or revealing his true power. I would say Gojo's technique in a technical aspect is definitely better and requires much more strategy and maneuvering strength to overcome compared to Sukuna's. In fact, I don't think anyone in Jujutsu Kaisen would even stand a chance against it. Kashimo would be defeated in seconds against Gojo just like he was against Sukuna. But the thing is, it's similar to Hunter x Hunter's fighting system. Every technique has different matchups, where Sukuna didn't even have to reveal his own technique. I personally think that shows how much more powerful he is compared to Gojo, despite having a supposedly weaker technique that we don't even know the function of yet. Yeah, he admits that limitless is a nuisance, but still managed to deal with it using his experimentation of Mahoraga. This brings us to domain amplification. In chapter 225, Kusakabe explained how Sukuna used this to neutralize Gojo's limitless. It works by using a domain which doesn't grant a curse technique, but instead pours an opponent's power into the empty space. But you lose the ability to use your own curse technique. However, Sukuna activates curse techniques and switches between amplification so quickly. Thus, Kashimo calls him a god, tipping the scale to Sukuna's favor even further. Now you may argue, ABD, Gojo can teleport out of Sukuna's clutches. Well, unfortunately, he can't, because a closed domain would prevent the use of teleportation, as it's a technique and not Gojo's innate speed. Amplification can also be applied too. Gege Akatami even confirmed that teleportation can only work under certain conditions. Plus, he used Kusakabe to address the readers questioning this. As Choso states, Gojo can teleport out of Sukuna's range. However, we found out he can't. Plus, don't disrespect Gojo. He wouldn't even attempt it because he isn't a coward. Even in chapter 226, he turned off his RCT on purpose just to teleport to Sukuna and use red right in his face. A lot of Satoru freaking Gojo fans, including myself, who read the fight weekly, would tunnel vision on one perspective. This is because we experienced the battle through Gojo's point of view, whereas Sukuna's strategy is only revealed between the rounds. I am a Gojo fan just like you, but that doesn't make me deluded to admit the truth. This swiftly brings me to the domain clashes, where we find Sukuna making even more risky decisions and demonstrating why Gojo didn't actually stand a chance, just like he claimed upon his death. Unlike normal domains, Sukuna's innate technique is active from the shrine rather than from himself, which means he can utilize his cleave and dismantle whilst using amplification, as Gojo confirmed in chapter 227. Because of this, Sukuna is able to use amplification inside Gojo's unlimited void alongside his own domain expansion. Now with this insane power, the odds of Sukuna winning are higher than Gojo, and if it's the Heian Era, it's almost impossible. Let's prove this. Throughout their fight, there were 5 domain clashes in total. In the first clash, it was stated their domain itself was equal. This was without any hand-to-hand combat or use of amplification from Sukuna. However, he still came out on top due to the effective range of his malevolent shrine, which then destroyed Gojo's barrier from the outside, giving Sukuna the W. In the second clash, Gojo changed the condition of his domain barrier to be stronger against external attacks, but in return, Sukuna added his own condition to make his domain's external attack stronger by focusing its range and turning off its can't miss command within Gojo's barrier. Whilst inside the barrier, Sukuna made use of amplification to go toe-to-toe and then managed to avoid a limited void by staying in contact with Gojo, therefore giving him enough time to destroy the barrier from the outside once again, giving him his second victory. Now you may argue, wait a second, this isn't fair. The second domain clash went in Sukuna's favor due to his prior knowledge from having Yuji's memories. But this intel would not be present with his Heian Era form, right? But utilizing domain amplification against Gojo would have still resulted in the same outcome. So arguing this is meaningless. Sukuna would have instantly realized how Unlimited Void works, especially since I mentioned earlier that Sukuna admitted he was turning off amplification on purpose so that Mahoraga could adapt to Unlimited Void based on the knowledge Yuji had given him in the first place. Therefore, his Heian Era form would not resort to using this strategy at all, instead focusing on destroying the domain from the inside. Moving us on to the third clash. Gojo's time in the prison realm allowed him to recreate a similar barrier in space, and in turn shrink his domain around Sukuna's, making his external barrier even stronger. This gave Gojo enough time to destroy Malevolent Shrine before Sukuna could take out the barrier from the outside, resulting in both domains collapsing, concluding in a draw. But more importantly, this revealed a win condition for each fighter, which you may not have realized. Suddenly, we have a time limit. 3 minutes and 9 seconds is the time it takes Sukuna to destroy Gojo's shrunken up domain expansion from the outside. But if Gojo can deal enough damage to Sukuna before then, Malevolent Shrine will collapse and Gojo will win. If Sukuna manages to hold out, Malevolent Shrine will destroy Unlimited Void's barrier, which means he wins. So, with the conditions set, the fourth clash entailed the same outcome, where inside the domain it seemed as if Gojo was winning the exchanges, which led to both their domains collapsing at the same time, leading to another draw. However, in the fifth clash, Gojo came out on top, with him winning the domain battle and finally landing his Unlimited Void. This was because of a 0.01 second lead. Now, guess what? Sukuna being late to cast his own domain was because he was taking the extra step of healing himself before burnout. Chapter 229 states, curse technique repair lags depending on the degree of physical healing. The difference was minuscule. This was actually another gamble and all part of Sukuna's plan. Gojo wondered why Sukuna didn't try to break his domain from the inside, but in chapter 228, he comes to the conclusion that Sukuna was purposely taking a riskier option. This gamble goes back to Sukuna not wanting to reveal all his cards, whilst waiting for a model that Mahoraga would create eventually to upgrade his curse technique. He did something similar in chapter 218 when he was fighting Yorozu. Here he avoided using his shrine and instead opted for 10 shadows, as Yorozu wasn't worth showing his real power. Instead, Sukuna just waited to adapt by summoning the wheel, mastering 10 shadows, and then allowed Mahoraga to destroy her true sphere. This was even confirmed during the fight with Gojo, so the same game plan is happening against him. Heck, even Angel states that if Sukuna figures out Limitless, Gojo would lose. From the hero's perspective, the gang believed Gojo was a stronger fighter inside the domain. This claim is not wrong, but as you can tell by now, Sukuna was handicapping himself on purpose. He was prioritizing Mahoraga's adaptation to Unlimited Void, which he admits later on in chapter 230. But since Mahoraga was already adapted to Unlimited Void, it saved the day, as the riskier plan worked out completely in Sukuna's favor to stop himself from dying at this moment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, considering the fact that a power scaling element is literally reduction, and the skill of a sorcerer is based on efficiency, even fractions of a second can make a difference. For example, even Yuji against Mahito could think of 4 different things at once within 0.2 seconds. So these guys are absolutely built built different. Using this logic against Heian Era Sukuna, who has 2 extra pair of hands and a mouth that is constantly chanting, by the way, and then there's 2 godly curse tools on display that annihilated sorcerers on Yoruzu's level with ease, as shown in chapter 238, we come to understand the shared difference between Sukuna and everyone else. Heck, even Sukuna was shocked that Kashimo, a man who had the title of strongest 400 years ago, survived his thunder attack because he expected him to die in one hit. The only reason he didn't was because of his innate resistance. Therefore, the 0.01 second difference that Gojo achieved would not occur against Heian Era Sukuna, which means Gojo would lose. Chapter 227 proves Gojo was just trying to buy time with Falling Blossom Emotion and Simple Domain. He was always on the back foot, which even Sukuna scoffed at because all it was doing was stalling the inevitable. He would have to use RCT at full throttle. Shoko claimed Gojo needed more time to heal his burnout, and by the end of the fight, we find out it was slowing down significantly as he cannot heal forever. He's a human at the end of the day. Also said Simple Domain negates the guaranteed hit, but compared to a real domain, the curse energy output will only buy Gojo time. After all, it's literally proven Gojo can't follow this repeated cycle multiple times. 5 was his limit, as he was giving himself more and more brain damage each time. As shown in chapter 230, Gojo becomes incapacitated and falls to his knees. Even healing burnout once was way too risky, according to Yuta, but Shoko confirms Sukuna is in better shape since he healed curse technique burnout fewer times. In chapter 230, Sukuna claims he knew all about this and what Gojo was doing from the very beginning. There are limits compared to flesh and bone. Even if you open a domain, you either die or won't have the precision to combat me any longer. So here we are, guys. This is the very moment Gojo would lose to Heian Era Sukuna, and even this weaker version if he wasn't prioritizing Maharaga or gambling. All he would have to do is close the domain barrier and let the cutting begin. This is reinforced in chapter 228 as Kusakabe claims that even with the on-the-fly change of domain conditions, Gojo's position will gradually weaken until he loses to Sukuna. Gojo claimed the domain clashes are not easy in chapter 226 by his own admittance, which means if it was even more difficult, he wouldn't stand a chance. Thus, the 5th domain clash that struck Sukuna for 10 seconds wouldn't even occur if he just simply focused on amplification. Sukuna instead would destroy the domains from the inside, and the timer would be even less than 3 minutes, which means Gojo wouldn't have time to inflict enough damage on Sukuna to prevent him from holding his shrine, which allowed the unlimited void to hit. All Heian Era Sukuna would do is spam 5 domain expansions in a row, forcing Gojo to fry his brain each time. Obviously, this doesn't make a great written story, nor would there be any good choreography, and that doesn't craft something interesting to read. So, Gege displayed their full powers in the most perfect way imaginable. At the end of the day, the advantage of Sukuna's true form is too much to ignore. It's objectively true that his original form from the very beginning of the domain clashes would mean Gojo would have died even faster. Now, on top of all of that, there is 1000 years of knowledge and experience just like Kenjaku. His true Jujutsu, divine techniques and tools are unknown. We don't even know what his other tool even does, yet he still wins. To put it frank, Gojo had very little chance of winning in the end. There are only 2 chances that I can think of. First is when Sukuna was taken aback by Curse Technique Reversal Red and Black Flash. That's when Sukuna assumed he would be able to tank everything to adapt, which is why he actually knocked Sukuna unconscious. Gojo might have been able to win if he had been able to accomplish accomplished that more quickly by the third spin of Mahoraga before he adapted. Sukuna's defeat was only a mere few seconds away. However, his gambling won. And number 2, the final hollow purple. Sukuna observed that if purple had hit him at close range, it would have killed him. But unfortunately, less damage was done by the purple without focused direction than if Gojo had just fired it directly at Sukuna. That was Gojo's final opportunity to win. Now, to enjoy more peak fiction and to find out about Yuji, the guy that will eventually defeat Sukuna thanks to being a demon god and having a soul exchange technique, watch this video on your screen right now.